I'm excited to have you because you're someone who figured out how to take a passion and
Yeah.
turn it into a profession. And yet, I would
Yes.
say both of your loves, the teaching and the
Yes,
writing, are callings because
they are.
it's a labor of love.
It is. Both of them are absolute passions of mine. I get a lot of questions about if I would ever want to switch and just do teaching or switch and just do publishing. And I don't know how I would let either of them go. I'm very emotionally attached to both of them. And I say too, I'm naturally a very introverted person, and that gravitates really nicely to publishing and to writing. But teaching is that extroverted side of myself too, where I get to have more of a performance during the day and interact with kids and get energy from kids, and then I can go home at night and do my quiet introspective writing time. So it's a beautiful balance between both of my jobs to have both of them. I don't know that I could ever give one of them up because I love both of them.
And they're geared toward different age of children, right? Because kindergarten
Yes,
teaching is like little humans and
little.
first time classroom people.
Yeah.
And then your writing is really that like young adult kind of middle schoolish age, right?
It is. So I teach kindergarten, which just as you said, those are the babies. They're coming to school and they are learning how to be people. They're learning how to communicate and how to talk and interact with each other. And that's most of what kindergarten teachers do is just teach kids how to interact safely and carefully and kindly with one another. And those things seem so different than what you would teach to a middle school kid, but essentially that's the same thing. That's what I'm always putting into my writing and into my stories is how do we behave as humans? How are we kind to one another? How do we allow space for other people to exist? And how do we understand who other people are? So a lot of what I teach very explicitly in kindergarten versus my writing, that same messaging isn't as explicit. It's more that undercurrent, some of the themes that I do in my writing. So it seems like those two might be far apart. They're actually much more intertwined together than at first glance. But my writing is geared for middle school. A great comparison is like the beginning Harry Potter books. Most people know those, or Percy Jackson. Those are hugely popular too. So that like 8 to 12-year-old range, upper elementary school to middle school. That's what my writing is for.
And so are you ever in like the kindergarten classroom and you get this idea and you're like, just a minute, go write it down so you can work on it later? Or do you in your mind have like a wall between your two worlds?
I do. I have a pretty clear wall between the two. My writing, when I get really into writing a story and into a book, the rest of the world can disappear for me. So I cannot afford to carry that over into my working day. But I for sure do keep some of that inspiration of things that kids might say and that are funny or questions that they have about the world that I think, oh, that's a really interesting question I could pursue. I try to hold on to those and maybe carry those into my writing later. But I think having a very clear boundary between my two jobs is very helpful. I'm sure you've heard of the stories of teachers who go home and they just work for hours at the end of the day or on the weekends. I think that my writing profession helps keep a very clear boundary between carrying too much work home with me too. So, school ends, and when I head home, then I can transition into my writing life. So I don't carry it. It's nice to have that balance. I don't carry each job over into the other one too much. Helps keep things a little more balanced.
So I totally lost your audio. Did anyone else? Or
Oh,
was it just me? I don't think it's you. I think it's me. But it could have literally just been my headphones.
I
Branson,
yeah, I did not lose her audio.
oh,
okay,
good.
great. Then we can just keep going. I heard the beginning and I
Okay.
heard the end, so I can keep going. I just wanted to make sure that they got it. So that was totally a weird thing with me, which I don't even know how it happened. I don't know. I mean, they're plugged in. We'll just keep going. I can hear you now, so
Okay.
that's great. We were talking about the separation. Yes. Do
Yes, and
you,
boundaries. Yeah.
is it, I mean, I mentioned at the beginning of this how you
Hmm.
started writing because you went to
Yes.
school to be a teacher, and that's something that, first of all,
Yeah.
God bless you, because to be a teacher,
It's a lot of work.
especially now, it's a lot of work and the funding, and we could do a whole podcast about what it's like to be a teacher nowadays. So
Yeah.
thank you for your work with
Well, thank you.
children.
That's very kind of you.
And yet the writing has been something that you love to do, but had it not been for that car accident in 2011,
Yeah.
would you be a writer?
Yes, I don't know. So, as I was thinking and preparing for this podcast and really thinking about the Flip Your Script, the title or the name that you guys have, and thinking about what moments in my life were the ones that helped me flip my script or where I had to make big changes. So, I think growing up, I always told stories to myself. In middle school and through high school, and then even in college, I loved reading. I was obsessed with reading, and I would tell stories. I think middle school is a time when so many kids are just sad. It's a very sad, difficult time. And how I coped with that is that I would tell stories to myself and I would make up these elaborate worlds. And that is how I would escape that sadness in middle school. So the act and the habit of telling stories to myself is something that I've always done. But it wasn't until that car accident, that was when I was 21, and just crossing a highway and got T-boned in the side. And then it was months of recovering. I don't know without that moment that I would have actually thought, oh, I could turn those stories I tell to myself into something that I could read. So I started writing books during that time because I had nothing else that I could do. I was just sitting at home and healing. And so I started trying to write some of those stories down. And I wrote 4 books. This is something I love to talk about when I am able to do school visits. So I wrote 4 books before I even had the thought of, oh, I could try to publish these, because I first started writing them and I was writing them purely for myself because I loved that escapism. I, was coping from healing from the car accident and from the emotions around that. And so the writing was just for myself, my own enjoyment. And it took 4 books for me to say, well, maybe I could try to find an agent with a story and maybe try to get it published. So I started doing that. Oh gosh, I don't know when that would have been, a long time ago, I'll just say. And it wasn't until my 14th book that I wrote, which seems like an incredible number, that my debut came out. So the whole trajectory of writing stories, that was a really long one. That was a hustle. It was pursuing something that I loved deeply, and trying to turn that into a profession. And that was maybe a decade's worth of time. And during that time, that's when I went back to school for teaching. I didn't originally go to school for teaching. I went to school for political science and then didn't know what I would do with that. So I had this whole period of time where I wandered. I wandered through my life of what would I do with political science? Or I love writing. Can I pursue that? And it wasn't until I went back to school to become a teacher and pursue that. And then, a few more years before my debut was actually able to come out. And so when I was thinking about the Flip Your Script time, that really aligned with about 2019 for me, 2018, 2019. And that would have been when I wrote, I of course have it right here, my debut, The Wolf of Cape Fen. And that is when I learned how to write about myself in my books. So I became a much more thematic writer, and I had been in a long-term relationship for a long time. So it was about 10 years of this odd wandering stasis almost in my life of being in a long-term relationship with someone who wasn't quite right. And I lived across the country and I needed to move home, but I wasn't willing to do that. And so when 2019 came, that's when I really figured out, okay, I need to be writing about myself. I need to make these huge life changes where a relationship would end. I would move from North Carolina back home to Minnesota. I would make that big change and find a new job up here, a new place to teach. So that huge moment of change for me is when like publishing happened, when I really found a great home for my teaching life. So many changes happened in 2019 for me. And that was my big flip your script moment for me. And yeah, so that's kind of how I ended up with both publishing and teaching, of needing to pursue both of those for myself. A lot of wandering years in there, though.
so many people I think can relate to
Yeah.
the wandering and the not
Yes.
knowing and the
Yeah.
feeling of, man, I don't know, something just isn't quite right. What
Yeah.
kept you going? Because I think there's a lot of probably insight you can give to folks about
Yeah.
how you didn't just stay stuck. And a lot of people
Yeah.
do, and then decades go by. Like, how do
They
you
do.
wander and move forward at the same
Yes.
time?
Yes. And that's such a fascinating thing to look back on because I resisted that change. I think there are some people, when I've listened to your podcast episodes, there's some people who walk so bravely into life change. And that was not me. I dug my heels in and I resisted, and that resistance for myself caused so much pain and so much turmoil of, I'm not willing to step into the change. I'm not willing to be brave about that, but that lack of bravery is just hurting myself. And so I think it was really becoming very honest about, what harm am I doing to myself by not making the changes that I need to make? Because my fears of change, that it was so huge in my mind, but the pain that I was causing myself was greater than that fear. So I think when the scales kind of unbalanced, that was when I was really able to make those changes that I needed to for myself, of really looking very honestly at what harm am I causing myself by not making those big changes and by not shifting out of the stasis or out of the wandering and being more direct with my life. And if anybody else is in that moment, I will say, like, the happiness that I've had after that time has just been monumental, incomparable to the before times for me, the wandering times.
And when you say causing harm to
Yeah.
your life, do you mean physical harm or do you mean missing out on things and therefore having harm or missing out on joy or
Yeah.
fullness, that kind of thing?
Yes, missing out, absolutely missing out on joy and missing out on life experiences, or and not being emotionally well, not being healthy toward myself too. So maybe not physical per se, unless just the manifestation of emotions in your body, that could be, but more just that emotional, and knowing that, I think there's a part of you that knows if I would make these changes, then I could be happier. And that regret is that's hard. It's so hard to live with that amount of regret or that type of regret. Um, and so making the change and not living in that moment of regret or in that wandering is just so much better. It's so much better.
So if I can thread
Yeah.
that decade. So it sounds like, tell me if I have this correct. So you have the car accident, which then forces you to write, and writing unlocks
Yes.
something that brings joy and that brings
Yeah.
fulfillment in a different way, which then helps you ultimately move to a place where you kind of think, you know what, I deserve bold joy.
Yeah.
I'm worthy of more joy, and I'm willing to go through and face the fears of
Yes.
taking that big leap because I want more of this light. Is that sort of
Yes.
accurate?
You said that beautifully. I could just take a clip of that and keep that for myself because you said that perfectly.
So the writing unlocked
Yeah.
this other part of you.
Yes.
So had the car accident not happened, you maybe wouldn't have realized, man, there's this whole other
Life.
thing that I could be doing, this whole other life.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
It is. It's fascinating just how something that feels really terrible and monumental and horrible in the moment can ultimately allow you to unlock something else in your life that you might not have otherwise.
And that can come through meeting the right person at the right time. And I don't mean
Yeah.
romantically. I mean, you could have a
Yeah.
conversation with a stranger and realize something new, or read a book, or listen to a podcast, like whatever it is. Oftentimes we have this thing that someone says, or we experience, or pain or
Yes.
struggle, and then it opens up something that we weren't expecting.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's so many people can do that, but I think that's the power of books too. And that's what I really, my first book, my debut, when I started writing more about myself, the whole theme in that story is, what dreams do we pursue for ourselves? Um, And what dreams do we have that we are too scared to actually admit out loud to ourselves? So the whole story is about dreams, but we are so scared of saying them out loud because we're superstitious. And if we say them out loud, then it might not make them ever come true.